The folder landed on my kitchen table the same way my son-in-law delivered most things he had already decided. With a quiet, deliberate thud, light enough to seem casual, heavy enough to be noticed. I was mid-pour with the kettle when he set it down. My daughter stood just behind him, slightly to his left, the way she had taken to standing in the past 2 or 3 years. Close enough to watch, not quite close enough to be accountable. He said my name once then. "We need to talk about the house." I set the kettle on the trivet. I did not sit. He pulled out a chair without asking, not his usual spot at the side, but the one at the head of the table, the one my husband had always used, and settled into it the way someone settles into a chair they've been thinking about for a while. My daughter took the seat beside him. Neither of them had taken off their coats. He started talking before I had fully turned around. The numbers came out smoothly, the way numbers do when someone has rehearsed them in the car on the way over. $280,000. Pre-construction condos in Mississauga stalled in the market correction. Private lenders with timelines that had, as he put it, become complicated. He spoke with the measured calm of a financial advisor presenting a product rather than a son-in-law explaining a disaster. As though the logic were self-evident and only a fool would resist it. The ask, stripped of language, was this: sign a home equity line of credit guarantee using my house as collateral. His debt? My house. My name on the papers. He called it a formality. A bridge. He said I was sitting on close to $900,000. In equity, that was, in his words, doing nothing. He said, "This is just practical at this stage of life." Practical, that particular word. My daughter looked at the tablecloth while he said it. She had rehearsed this too. I could see it in the way she sat, how her hands were folded, how carefully she was not reacting to my face. She had that stillness she'd carried since she was a teenager, the one that meant she had already made her decision, and my response would determine whether I was reasonable or not. I asked one question. What happens if the lenders come for the collateral? He waved a hand. That's not going to happen. My daughter finally looked up. "Mom, you're not using the equity for anything, and honestly, you're not going to be here forever. The money has to go somewhere eventually." She did not mean it as cruelty. She meant it as logic. I had learned, over many years, that those two things can be indistinguishable when the person speaking has already decided what the right answer is. I said I would look at the paperwork. I needed a few days to read it properly. My son-in-law's expression did not change, but something around his eyes tightened. He was a man who experienced pauses as obstruction, but he nodded. "Don't take too long. This is time-sensitive." After they left, I stood at the kitchen window for a long time. The backyard maple had gone deep orange. It was October in the way that Ontario Octobers are, bright and cold together, beautiful in a way that holds no promises. I had lived in this house for 34 years. I had brought my daughter home from the maternity ward on a February night, so cold the windshield kept fogging, and I kept wiping it with my coat sleeve while my husband drove 5 kilometers an hour under the speed limit the whole way. I had stood in this kitchen the morning we paid off the mortgage, and my husband had made pancakes even though it was a Tuesday, because he said some things deserved pancakes on a Tuesday. He died 4 years ago, in April, quietly, the way he had done most things. He had also been a planner, a careful, quiet, thorough planner. The first time I tried to speak to my daughter about her husband's finances, she was sitting at this same table, and she put her hand up before I had finished my second sentence. She said, "You've never really given him a chance." That was not true. What was true was that I had never been comfortable with the way he moved through money. Fast, certain, always persuaded that the next deal was the one that would finally land. He had come into our lives with that confidence already fully formed, and my daughter had mistaken certainty for security. I had watched him lose $30,000 in a cryptocurrency venture the year after they were married. I had listened while he described the Mississauga pre-construction project with the same energy, the same assurances, the same absolute conviction that this time the numbers were solid. I said to my daughter, "Wait, have someone independent look at it, ask questions." Her husband told her I was jealous of their ambition. Extended family echoed him. They said I had always been like this, cautious to the point of being cold, holding tight when I should be letting go. My daughter started calling less. When she did call, there was a measuring quality to it, a careful selection of what to mention and what to withhold. I learned to say less and notice more. When their rental lease ended 2 years after the wedding, I offered them the 2 spare rooms. She was my daughter, and I thought proximity might soften what distance had allowed to harden. Instead, it only showed me, in finer detail, what I had already suspected. My son-in-law noticed the garage first. My husband had used it as a workshop for 20 years. It smelled of cedar shavings and machine oil, and, faintly, of the pipe tobacco he had given up in 2009, but whose smell had embedded itself in the walls long before that. My son-in-law looked at it the way developers look at empty lots, as potential being squandered. He suggested converting it, a gym, a rental suite, a proper office for his business ventures. I said no. He smiled pleasantly and told my daughter I was sentimental about an old garage. He was not wrong about the sentimental part. He was wrong about what that meant. My husband had built things in that workshop, careful, patient things. The bookshelf in the hallway, a small table that still stands beside my reading chair, and a cedar box the size of a shoebox with dovetail joints so smooth you could run your thumb along them and feel nothing but continuity. He had spent 2 winters on it without telling me why. When he gave it to me, he said, "For the things that need keeping." Inside were documents, his lawyer's card, the trust instructions, a sealed envelope with my name on it, and his grandfather's watch wrapped in a square of gray flannel. He told me only to open the envelope if something happened with the house. I had always thought he worried too much. The dinner was on a Thursday. My son-in-law had invited 2 of his business contacts, a couple I had met twice before, who smiled at the right moments and agreed with whoever had last spoken with confidence. My daughter made a roast, a good one, the kind she made when she needed something to feel like a normal occasion. The folder came out after dessert. My son-in-law slid it across the table with the ease of a man who had been waiting to do it all evening. He said, "We thought it was better to do this together, as a family." The male guest, broad-shouldered, jovial in the way of men who never doubt they'll be welcomed in a room, said, "Smart to use the equity while rates are where they are. A lot of people are doing this." My daughter poured more wine, not into my glass. My son-in-law explained the terms again, slower this time, with the particular patience reserved for people who are assumed to be slow. He pointed at the signature line with one finger. "Just your name. The rest is handled." The female guest leaned toward me and said, gently, At this stage of life, it really does make sense to let the next generation carry the weight. She meant it kindly. It landed the way a stone lands in still water. I looked at my son-in-law across the table. He had staged this carefully. Witnesses, a warm meal, the careful framing of family generosity. He had timed it for after dessert, when the room was warm and refusal would look ungracious. I thought of something my husband used to say. The most expensive documents never shout. I nodded once, slowly. I said I needed one more night. He exhaled with the patience of someone who could afford to wait 24 hours. He did not knock the next morning. He came through the side door the way he had taken to coming in, without pausing, without announcing himself, as though the small formality of knocking had quietly expired somewhere along the way. My daughter was behind him with a coffee she had made for herself. He sat down at the head of the table again and said, "So, are we doing this?" I said I had more questions about the repayment structure. His voice shifted beneath his expression. "There's nothing complicated about it. You've had all night." He slid the pen across the table. "Don't make this harder than it is." My daughter said quietly, "Mum, please. Not, do you understand? Not, are you all right? Just the single word, the way you say it to someone who is causing a scene." I looked at my son-in-law's hand, flat on the table. I looked at the pen. I looked at my daughter's face and tried to find, beneath the careful composure she had learned from him, the girl who used to climb into my bed during thunderstorms. I said, "I need a few minutes, I'll be right back." I walked down the hallway past the bookshelf my husband built, past the framed photographs on the wall. My daughter at 8, with a gap-toothed grin she was mortified by in her 20s. The two of us at a lake in Algonquin the summer before his first diagnosis, and into the bedroom, which I still thought of as ours. I opened the closet. On the top shelf, behind the folded quilt my mother had made, was the cedar box. I sat on the edge of the bed and opened it. His handwriting was neat, blue ink on good paper. The letter said, "If you're reading this, someone has pushed too far. Go see Robert. He has everything you need. You don't owe anyone an explanation. Just go." Robert was the lawyer. Same office on King Street, same frosted glass door, 20 years of it. I put the watch in my coat pocket and felt its weight settle. Familiar, steady. Then I stood, went back to the hallway, picked up my coat from the hook, and walked into the kitchen. My son-in-law looked up from his phone. "Ready?" "I need to run an errand," I said. "I'll be a few hours." He frowned. "The folder." "Will be here when I get back." I left before he could say anything else. I packed my suitcase that afternoon while my son-in-law was on a call upstairs. Not everything, just what mattered. The cedar box, the watch, 3 changes of clothes, my husband's photograph from the nightstand, the documents I kept in the fireproof box in the closet. My daughter was in the living room with her laptop. I could hear the sound of her typing. I wrote 4 words on a sheet of notepaper and placed it on the kitchen table beside the unsigned folder. "I need some quiet." Then I called a taxi from the side door. It was raining, the thin, steady October rain that falls without drama. I walked down the front path and did not look back. I had expected that part to hurt more than it did. Instead, there was something unexpected. The sensation of a breath that had been held too long, finally released. My daughter texted before I reached the corner. My son-in-law texted 20 minutes later. I read both messages and replied to neither. The motel on the edge of town was small and clean and asked no questions. I placed the cedar box on the bedside table and sat by the window and held the watch in my palm for a long time. Outside, the rain continued. I thought about my husband, about the way he had built that box, joint by joint, winter after winter, for a reason he had not explained until he was done, about the way he had always finished things before explaining them. He had seen further than I had. That was the truth of it. In the morning, I drove to King Street. The lawyer's hair had gone fully white since I'd last seen him, but his eyes were the same, sharp and still. He shook my hand with both of his and said, "I half expected you'd be calling." I said, "My son-in-law wants me to guarantee a $280,000 debt against the house." He said, "Sit down, let's open the trust." My husband had set it up 8 years ago, not in response to any single event, but out of the same methodical care that had characterized everything he built. He had updated it twice. The house was held in a protective family trust, structured specifically to shield me from financial coercion. The clause was written in plain language, the way my husband had always preferred. If any person, including family, attempted to pressure me into signing documents tied to the property, threatened changes to my residency, attempted to alter property access without my consent, or made documented statements about my capacity or length of remaining life in the context of financial decisions, all ancillary benefits would be immediately and permanently forfeited. This included a contingency education fund he had set aside for any future grandchildren. It included the workshop contents, 40 years of tools and equipment he had maintained with a care most people reserve for living things. Everything. The lawyer asked me to walk him through what had happened. I described the initial conversation, the dinner with guests, the pen slid across the table, the morning visit without knocking. He wrote steadily. Then he asked about messages. I handed him my phone. He read through the texts. My son-in-law the previous evening. "If you don't come back tonight, we'll handle this without you." My daughter's voicemail from the night of the dinner. "You don't really have other options at your age." He noted the timestamps. He looked up from the phone and said, "They activated the clause. Multiple times over." He sent the formal notices that afternoon. I did not stay to watch. I sat in the waiting area with coffee and looked at the frosted glass door and thought about the last time I had sat in this exact chair. The day my husband and I had signed the original trust papers, and I had told him he was being excessive, and he had said worry was cheaper than regret. My daughter called that evening. Her voice when I answered was not what I had expected. Not anger, something older than that. She said, "Mum, there's a letter from a law firm. It says the house is in a trust. It says that there's a forfeiture clause. The education fund is gone." I said, "Yes." She said, "We didn't know about any of this." I said, "Your father did. He planned it a long time ago." A silence. She said, "We were already losing everything. The lenders had started the process. He told me he had it managed." She stopped. "He told me signing was the only way out." I said, "He told me the cryptocurrency was solid. He told me the first condo purchase was researched. He told me the private lending arrangement was low risk." Another silence, longer this time. She said, "I didn't want to do this." I said, "I know you believe that." She said, "Mum, your father and I built that house around you," I said. My voice was even. 34 years. Every room in it has something of your childhood in it. And the night your husband slid a pen across that table and told me not to make it harder than it was. That was the night I understood that love does not issue ultimatums in the homes it claims to care about. I heard her breathing unsteady. I said, "I'm not angry with you, but I am finished arranging myself around what is convenient for him." I ended the call gently and set the phone face down on the motel table. My son-in-law sent a text 2 days after the formal notices arrived. It said, "You planned this. You let us walk into it." I read it in the parking lot in the morning light. I wrote back one sentence and sent it before I changed my mind. "I didn't plan anything. Your choices activated what my husband prepared years ago." "That's a different thing." He did not respond. The foundation's representative contacted them that week. Polite, organized, outlining timelines and legal obligations with the calm of people who have done this before. The education fund was frozen. The workshop contents, per the trust's provision, would transfer to a woodworking program for youth in the region that my husband had quietly supported for years. He had added that provision himself, the lawyer told me. He had thought it was a fitting place for the tools to go. I had not known about that part. I sat with it for a while when I heard it, the image of him, alone in that garage in the evenings, thinking about this, deciding it, planning even the ending of the things he loved. The apartment was on the 3rd floor of a low-rise building on a quieter street. East-facing windows, which I had asked for specifically. A small balcony. Enough space for the bookshelf from the hallway, which my daughter arranged to have delivered on a Saturday morning without being asked. I watched the 2 young men carry it up the stairs, and I thought of my husband measuring the wood in the garage, checking the level twice, fitting the joints. I put the cedar box on the nightstand, the watch I wound every morning. The apartment smelled of fresh paint for the first 2 weeks. By November, it smelled like mine. Tea, the cedar of the box, the particular warmth of wool blankets left on chairs. I cooked what I wanted, when I felt like it. I slept without waiting for sounds in the hallway. I left books open on the table and dishes in the drying rack, and did not account for myself to anyone. Small freedoms, the kind that feel enormous when you have been careful for a long time. I thought about my daughter in the evenings sometimes. Not with the sharp ache I had expected, but with something more complicated. The kind of thinking you do when you love someone and do not yet know what shape that love will take going forward. She had signed a lease on a 1-bedroom near her office. I learned this from a brief text she sent in November. "Got my own place. Closer to work." Nothing more. I wrote back, "Good, take care of yourself." 3 weeks before Christmas she called. Not with urgency, just to call. We talked for 20 minutes about ordinary things. The snow, a series she had started watching, a market she'd found near her building. Before she hung up, she said, "Dad always told me you were the more prepared one of the 2 of you. I used to think he was flattering you." I said, "Your father was the prepared one. I only trusted his preparation." A pause. She said, "I'm sorry, Mum." I said, "I know. We didn't resolve anything." That was all right. I had lived long enough to understand that some repairs happen slowly, or incompletely, or into something different than what existed before. And that different is not always worse. I set the phone down and looked out the window. The first real snow of the season had started. The quiet kind, no wind, just white descending steadily over the rooftops and the bare branches of the trees along the street. I had not signed a single page. I had not raised my voice or explained myself to anyone who had already decided who I was. I had packed a suitcase, remembered where the documents were kept, and walked out a door. My husband had spent 8 years making sure that was enough. As it turned out, it was. Some people, when I tell it, call what happened justice. Others say I was lucky my husband had thought ahead. I think he would have said it was neither luck nor justice. Just the same thing he said about every shelf he ever built, every joint he ever cut. Do the work carefully while there is still time to do it, and trust that it holds. I poured more tea and watched the snow, and breathed like a woman who belonged entirely to herself.